So where I left off last was that we were going to break away and talk about Persians and Zoroastrianism for a moment. As we remember from going over the ancient Hebrews and the Israelites, that it was the Persians who ended up sending the Jewish captives from Babylon back to their homeland, favoring the Yahweh temple priests. And the Persians go down quite favorable in the history of the Jews. And so we were also talking about how religious toleration was a part of the Persian Empire. But Persia was an empire, and you don't establish yourself through peace to be an empire. You do it through the sword. And so also the nature of their expansion and what they were doing, like all empires, is going to affect one group differently than the other. For Jews and Persians, you're going to look at from the Bible to even traditional rabbinic Judaism, which we will discuss later, especially the legacy of Alexander the Great. Again, for Jewish history, Persia goes well. In Greek culture and history, Persia represents their their total enemy, and you're going to see this contrast again between the Greeks and the Persians translate into kind of an East versus West in the future. So despite the fact that the Bible, which also influences Western civilization, looks at the Persians favorably, much of the political dialogues and the history recorded in Greek literature is going to affect a lot of the political imagery and imagination of the West in somewhat of a negative way. Okay, but I won't go down through all the stuff that's in the textbook. It talks about how the different Persian rulers did different things, from Cyrus to Cambyses and so forth. And what I really wanted to then just focus on is several things. One, that like all great empires, they leave their legacy of violence and domination, and simultaneously they also do things like build roads and other things to bring in their empires together, which are going to have effects that are great for all the people around them. And they did treat many ethnic groups with tolerance in a way that other empires didn't do. And so again, they're doing something very different than what we saw traditionally in Mesopotamia. Also, they had a religion, and the religion, Zoroastrianism, you may not have heard of, but it's very significant for its effect on the Jews, and by default, also the way that Western spirituality then is formed. So, just to briefly say, its founder was a man named Zoroaster, or also known as Zarathustra. He was his actual time in history and what he did is vague, like many other people from the ancient past. Okay, they put down here in the textbook that he lived and preached sometime between 1400 and 900 BCE. And I've seen different dates than that. It's clear that no one's really sure. But his ideas were significant in several things. One, he was henotheistic, if you remember those terms I talked about. He believed in one God, Ahura Mazda, and that was opposed to Ahriman, the god of darkness. And so there were other gods. This bad god was a powerful god, but the one true god and the ultimate conquering and victorious god would be Ahura Mazda. Okay. In this case, also, it was dualistic. In and dualistic in the sense of there being pure good and pure evil. Okay, now the textbook says that it was dualistic but not a polytheistic religion. Um, that can always be debatable, but I think henotheistic is the right term, and dualistic absolutely. Now, so where does this potentially have an influence on Judaism? Well, remember that the Jews did have workings with Persia. And if you look in the Bible, just for example, and this is not in the text, but the word Satan is a verb, and God even tells one of his angels to become a Satan to a false prophet, Balaam, that is going to hurt God's people. So it's God basically tells this angel to become a Satan, a Satan, a block or an obstacle to this false prophet. And if you really look in the earlier parts of the Old Testament, you don't see a personality that we would call Satan. Even the serpent in the Garden of Eden is simply said to be a serpent in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, it's going to go say that was actually the devil, that was Satan. But if you look at the actual original book of Genesis, it says a serpent deceived Eve. That's it. Now we only get to the later books like Job where we really see a personality emerge that would be an entity opposed to God. That's a person, Satan. He walks into the congregation of angels and comes to God and makes a challenge about God's servant Job. Okay. Many historians believe that Satan as a powerful entity opposed to God, and that this idea of cosmic war, even like what you would see in the book of Revelation, or the fact that, like, let's say 2 Corinthians 4:4 talks about the God of this world blinding the minds of unbelievers, that these things could possibly link to the influence of Zoroastrianism. You can't 100% say that, though. And so I think that's also fair to point out. But it appears that in Judaism, much of what comes out of Zoroastrianism does seem to influence the religion of Judaism. But again, I would say that it's not like 100% empirical to draw on those links. I think that's fair to point that out. But ultimately, I think it's also fair to say, though, that dualism and the nature of Satan, when you look at Judaism and especially Christianity compared to other religions, has more similarities than not, especially compared to some other belief systems. Okay, and so as a side note, if anybody reads the German philosopher Nietzsche, he wrote a book called Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and he was writing his own original work using this ancient Persian man, and he was in another one of his works. He basically says Western civilization got this idea of dualism, of good and evil, and a good God versus a bad God from the Persians, from Zarathustra, and because he brought this in, these terrible concepts, I'm going to bring him in to end it, basically. Okay, Nietzsche was against Christianity and the legacy of Judaism and these ideas that came from the West. So he was seeing a link between Zoroastrianism and Christianity, and he wanted it to kind of like bring them back in to end it. That was what he was doing. So just to give you the way and ideas and how these things come into modern times and thinkers. I will just end that there for now. If there's any more questions about Zoroastrianism, please feel free to send them my way. As a quick side note, the band Queen, Freddie Mercury, was in fact a Zoroastrian by birth. All right, there's an interesting fact of the day. All right, I'll end it there.